Welcome everyone, and this is a Word Crash Course Part 5, Tables and Figures. So for this one, we're going to start adding some of those non-text items into our document here. So now, let's say I would like a table added in my document. So what I'm going to do is get some space for it, and again, I prefer usually to clear the formatting out when I'm working with these extra empty paragraphs that just give me some room to work. And that's that eraser button, clear formatting. And I'm going to go in over and grab a table. And this is actually out of the template, but I'm just going to use it for an example. And I'm going to drop it in here. And as you can see, it's just basically a boilerplate table. We can add data here. And there it is. Now we know that we're going to need a title as well. So I'm going to call it Table 1, title of Table 1. Now, your style manual, whether that's APA or MLA or Chicago, they're going to give you some guidance as to how you should format them. Some of the style manuals like this to be in bold and different other things. And then APA, for instance, it actually sets the table prefix up here. I'm going to get that lined up over there. And we don't get any punctuation. This is APA. And so basically that's our title. And the thing that we're going to need, just like everything else, is we're going to need basically a style for this. So what I'm going to do, again, just forsaking any sort of a style manual, we're just going to go with this very plain Table 1, title of Table 1. There's no formatting applied, but it's there. I'm going to just double check. And I do want to make it, I like table and figure titles to be single spaced because the guidelines ask for them to be single spaced. So there we go. Just like before, I'm going to call this one Table Title. And now as we move forward, just like in our previous lesson with the GS1, 2, and 3, this table title needs to be only on your table titles. If it goes anywhere else, there's going to be problems. So just be careful that this here stays in normal or something else. And in fact, what I do in the template is I remove all this extra spacing here. I make it about a 3-point size table, or I make it go 3 points just like that. And I make a new style called table text, just like that. And then I'm going to do a note for table 1. And single with 12 is good there. You could even go to single with 18. I actually kind of like just a little bit extra because I think it looks nicer with the table. But for this tutorial, we'll go back to 12. It's okay. 1 line of space is fine. Then we go right here, go table note. And now we've got some styles that are set up for our tables. And just for the sake of having one more entry, I'm going to add a table here. And this you can just paste in. It's going to just push this down as long as you've selected up here to the end of that paragraph. Now I've got table 2 and title of table 2. So now I want to add a couple figures. And to do that, I'm just going to put, again, I'll do normal. You can also do that same thing with the eraser, just getting it into that normal style. And then I'm going to go over and get an image. And this image is just right out of the template. So now here's a figure, and I'm just going to go figure 1, Old Main. And then what I want to do here is first, I'm going to make this centered. I'll check the line spacing. It's single with 12. That's pretty good. And then I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to go figure title and hit OK. Oh, and actually, I made a mistake there. I'm going to call this figure because I want a style for just my figure. So that'll be where I put a figure. Now, when you're working with your images, and especially however they get pasted into your document, there's a chance that you could end up with a table with an anchor applied. You may have seen this anchor before. And the idea is that you can kind of navigate this or move it around and put your title down there and get everything to go. But you can see all the trouble it's causing me. And if you're encountering that, if you have a figure and it's not behaving the way you want it to, what you need to do is put it in line with text. And it's still not in the right spot, but you can Control X and cut it, and then Control V and paste it. And so now you've got your figure there. And again, those anchors they're kind of a problem sometimes if you're working with text because it'll affect the way that the text moves around that image. Now with the last one here, this is where we're going to put our figure title style. I hit OK, and there it is. So now let's say I'd like another figure, and I'm just going to put that right here. And I'll just push that over to normal. And I'm going to go ahead and get another image on the other monitor and bring it over here. And this will be figure 2. I'm just going to call it Bison. And of course, there's more we could say about that, but I'm going to just call it that. And there we go. So now I'd like to go up to table of contents. And what I'm going to do is add a page break right here. And I'm going to go ahead and call this list of tables. Now our list of tables guidelines calls for a table and a page column heading. And the way I do that is I'll just type them in here, and what you're going to need is a tab. And this is where I'm going to show you how to work with tab stops. Now, normally your tab is just what you use. Some of you might type them at the beginning of each paragraph to get that first line indent. But I like to use tabs for the placement of text. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, now 6.5 inches is how wide the page is before you go into the margins. You don't want to go in there. So I'm going to do 6.49, which is just a hair underneath 6.5 inches. I'm going to set my right tab right there. And I don't need any other details. And I'll set that. And now it's going to spread that across the page. And then I just give the underlining that is required. So now I'm going to go ahead, and the way I do this is just a new custom table of contents. There are other ways to do it. For example, there's a table of figures functionality here as well, but the way that I've worked with it and the way that I found it to be the most straightforward for my purposes and what's in the template is to do it this way. So I go into the options, and I'm going to get rid of this GS1. I'm going to get rid of heading 1. I'm going to go find my table title style, and I'm going to give it level 1 because I want it to be on the first level of the table of contents. Then I'm going to hit OK. Place this table of contents? No. So now I've got this there. You always want to say no, by the way, when it asks if you want to replace the main table of contents. So now what our guidelines ask for is to get rid of the table prefixes, just like that. And now on some levels, if you just do that, you're generally going to be in decent shape. The other thing I like to do is slide things over. In fact, I'm going to do that for both of them. You can see I'm applying, I call this the hanging indent. It's a subsequent line, and not just me calling it that. That's what Microsoft Word calls it, a hanging indent. And in case these go longer than one line, that's going to help line things up. But what I do there is I just add a tab character. I'm just typing the tab, and there it is. So this, you can't go wrong. This is generally going to be exactly what we're looking for. Now, unfortunately, if you do entire table like we did with the table of contents, you're going to lose all of that formatting. Our hanging indent is gone. Everything is gone. So that's something that you're going to want to be wary of. There's not really, there are some ways to work around it, but that would be something for down the road. And in fact, those solutions I found sometimes cause more trouble. So for me, the most straightforward thing is generally just to update it and then try to update it with that full update as little as possible. If you're working and you're very early in the process, I would just do the full update every time and then just forget about that formatting that I showed you until the very end. And a couple quick shortcuts that I'll show you. So if I do that, what I like to do if I have, especially if I have a list with 25 tables in it, I do Control H, which is find and replace. And I'm going to find table space, and I'm going to replace it with nothing. And you can press this button one time here, and you can replace, and now be careful because you don't want to just replace all. And you can just use those buttons to replace as you go. And if it asks you about continuing searching, you don't want to continue searching. Now, with that said, when I go back to this, if you hit, in fact, I got to select the whole thing before I do that. You have to press this button once, but I want to mention that right now, if you hit Alt-R, Alt plus R is going to do the same as the replace command. And you can kind of see it flash over there. Now, Alt plus F is going to be find next, so you can skip one. So Alt-R, you can kind of see it flashing over there, and then Alt-F. Continue searching, no. Now, the final thing I'll show you here, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure the whole thing is selected. To add that tab character like I showed in the first one, if you press a period and a space, and you replace it with a period and a special tab character down here, and you can just type in that ~T if you want as well, but you just get the tab character, you can do that as well. Find and replace is one of the most useful and quick tools for making some of those types of changes. And I encourage you to look into it a little more, even not just for this, but for a lot of other purposes as well. So now the final thing I want to do here is make a page break, and then I'll go right here. And now I'm going to go, and if you remember from part one, no need to do all that other work. If you can just go grab the settings and then just do the quick underline, and then I clear that out what I just made there, because if you actually hit enter, this is going to be the same settings, and you can see that's not great. So you just want to clear out your formatting. I use clear formatting a lot. And then I'm going to go in here and basically do the same thing. There's my figure title style that I want. And then I'm going to get rid of the stuff that I don't want. So I have just, that's what's there. Hit OK. And I do not want to replace. So there it is. Slide that over. And you can see how quickly it goes once you get rolling. And we're done. A final note, be very cautious with replace all, because as you saw with the first one, you could end up replacing things like that, especially when doing this find and replace. Sometimes figure titles have multiple period stops, and then there's another thing that's added to that figure title. You don't want to put a tab in there when you're doing this. Final thing I want to mention, inside of tables, there's a lot of properties, and it's good to be comfortable with them. Let's say, for instance, you need 6.5 inches wide. You want it to be as wide as the margins will allow. So you can just set that to be the preferred width, and you're good. Let's say if you ever encountered a table, sometimes people like to do odd things like, oh, and then you try to shrink that down, and well, that one it worked, but sometimes it won't let you do that. If you ever have any kind of trouble there, the best way to do it is to specify the height to be 0.1 or something that's really small, and make sure it's at least. That'll push it all together, and then your paragraph settings, like if you want it to be a little bit bigger, you could set it within the paragraph, and that's a little more control, in my opinion. If you're ever formatting a table and you find that even though you're asking it to do things and it's not quite responding the way that you want it to do, sometimes I've found that if you go into your options here, this automatically resize to fit contents is technically, it's typically the default that Word uses, and it's kind of useful in a lot of ways. But if it's causing you trouble, just turn it off. Then, if you're ever needing a little more space, these left and right cell margins, you can kind of shrink those down a little bit. Don't go down too far, but if you go down to 0.4 or 0.5, that might give you so that you have a little extra room in each cell, and you're not having to break a word to the next line or anything like that. Last thing I should mention is while the title has to be in that Times New Roman 12 or whatever your paragraphs are in, the text in the table can be smaller if you need it to be. So if you have a lot of information, you can shrink that down. And then there's not really a lot of guidance in our guidelines, but I tend to shrink the notes to match the table here. This doesn't have to be consistent with everything else. You don't have to set them all to be 10 now. So you can vary them. It's one of the few exceptions to where we want most everything else to be consistent. But we want to give you guys a lot of flexibility to work with these tables. In the next part, I'm going to talk about the final bit of flexibility for that, which is working on a landscape-oriented page.